Hi, it's good to be back with you. Today, I'd like to talk about a topic that is, top of mind for a lot of the clients and students that I tend to work with, and it's top of mind for so many people in the world, which is how do we change the world for better? How do we effect change that makes the world a better place, that makes our world uh, more harmonious? This question of how do we make a difference in the world, how do we make the world a better place, is really a question that burns strongly here, and is a question and a curiosity that was alive for me from a very early age. I remember as a child looking out on the world as a young child, and that world mostly consisted of family life and going to school. Um, and I would be puzzled, and I would be uh, troubled often when I saw the interactions and the behaviors of those around me. Intuitively, I didn't have the language that I attempt to offer now as an exploration and pathway for clarity that I uh, hopefully have now. But at the time as a child, I intuitively understood or knew that most of what played out in human behavior was not an honest reflection, was not an honest playing out of love, of our true potential. When I became active in my life, or free, if you like, from much of being on the treadmill of education and then go to college, and free in the world as an independent adult, this question of how to make the world a better place became more active. Not that it went dormant in the in-between years, but more the choices opened up as to how to express my interest in being a world changer. And in my 20s and early 30s, some of my energy and attention went in the direction of being an activist, for justice and for peace. And then there was a changing course. The interest grew here for an exploration of inner life, of what is now very clearly for me the path of, to call it a path, an interest in waking up, an interest in becoming conscious. And for a time, it looked like that exploration that remains primary here, that remains the primary interest and driver for how I spend my time, where I place my attention. It looked for a time that I needed to, put aside the world-changing aspect to my previous desire. And certainly, and still for some, certainly in the kind of common image of becoming conscious, waking up spiritually, the image of that is to take yourself away from the world, go to the mountains of Tibet and spend years in a monastery learning to meditate. And that's the path of consciously waking up, a kind of forsaking of the world. But even though that idea certainly has circulated here, go away and just devote yourself to being spiritual, that never looked in the end to be the way. And so an interest has grown here naturally and organically of how the two pursuits, if you like, they're not really opposite pursuits, but the two paths, if you like, of waking up consciously and um, waking up to our true nature and having impact, having influence in the world for good. What's woken up here is that these two apparent opposites go hand in hand. That when we wake up spiritually, when we wake up to our true nature as love, we become impactful, we become an influencer, we become a world changer as a consequence of that waking up. Now, there's some misunderstandings along the way that need to get cleared up. The movers and shakers that come to me, those that are driven by desire to make the world a better place, are often in a place of conflict in themselves. Or at least they're questioning, they're wanting to know, how to make real impact, how to make real influence. Whether they're in whether they are engaged in the sphere of business, they own a business, they create products or services. They're in the sphere of climate change, they want to become an activist and be an influencer to influence government and those in charge, if you like, of the kinds of decisions that have impact on climate. Whether they're in the field of politics, they're drawn to be in that sphere, to be leaders and policymakers. Whatever is your sphere, the question is, how is it possible to engage in those spheres of life and simultaneously be a force, be an influencer for a better world? Because it's clear to so many of us that the way that humanity has been tinkering with life, changing this through policies, going to war over there, bearing down on neighbours or nations to control. All of these approaches create the same outcome. Some level of conflict, certainly competition, and escalating to wars. We see this over and over in history. So there's something about that approach, the old approach, that is certainly not working. Let's take an example, for instance. Say there's a great interest alive in you for becoming, of wanting to bring into greater awareness for yourself and others the importance of respecting the earth and influencing the acceleration of climate change. How can that activism, that engagement with life, that level of life, how is it possible to have an influence and an impact that is spiritually awake, where actions come from love? Well, there we have it. There are actions that come from love, from an understanding of who we really are, from waking up to our true nature. And those actions can only come from love, because there's an awakeness that is alive. There's an awakeness that is a direct connection with and a direct alignment with the source of life itself. And if anything, to call it a thing, if anything knows what's best for life, including all of humanity, all of Gaia, if anything knows that, it's the source of life. It's the source of that gives rise and gives birth to the manifest world. So it's so obvious, that when we wake up, and really embody our understanding that who and what we are is love and infinite potential that only knows how to act to help bring an awake consciousness into being, then that's the way to go. That the work, as well as learning about climate change, being able to perhaps deliver, stand up in public and speak to the issue, what's primary is to have an embodied, alive, present understanding of who we really are. Without that, there can be a great interest in being an activist for climate change and come from identity, come from a misunderstanding of who we are, come from fear, from judgment. So the activist who comes from fear and judgment can only communicate fundamentally a message of fear, a message of we're doomed, that we're under threat. And it can only communicate that. Even if that activist is speaking of giving a message that on the surface looks like a hopeful message of things that are possible, if we do them, they will work out. The underlying vibrational message that is being offered is one of fear. And so that's the only outcome that can come from that. Gandhi put it much more succinctly than I'm giving here when he said, be the change you want to see in the world. Be the change. Be the shift in consciousness that allows for actions to come from love, to come from infinite potential, to come from the source of life that never runs out of solutions, to come from that place. The very same action that comes to mind from the climate activist who is in fear can also come to the activist that is awake. For instance, a public protest of laying down in the road and stopping traffic for a morning in a big city that draws a lot of attention to it, media attention, this and that, social media attention, and it increases, the in the public on the public radar, it heightens the issue of climate and the need to take action. So, laying on the road, there can be an activist who is acting out of a misunderstanding of who they are, acting out of fear, and right beside them is laying down an activist who is coming from love and understanding. So the actions themselves may be identical. When we are acting in the world, acting in our business, acting in our sphere from a place of fear, or we're coming from an awakened consciousness and we are in the same sphere, whether it's business or climate change or a life of service another way. When we come from consciousness, the actions might be exactly the same as coming from fear, and yet the outcome has an entirely different trajectory. When we are acting from alignment with love and service and devotion to what is awake in us, to the degree it's awake in us in that moment, when we are acting in alignment with that, when actions come inspired from that understanding, our actions emit, transmit, vibrate. Even if we don't say a word, our entire being is offering out a coherent, energetic vibration, a level, if you like, of consciousness, a consciousness that helps harmonize, heal, convey and invite peace, convey and invite waking up, is a magnet for others to wake up, to come out of fear and come into an understanding of their infinite, ever-flowing, creative potential, to come up with solutions to all of the apparent problems and the play of the world that really does need our attention, if you like, our conscious attention, if true change that is permanent change in the direction of greater harmony, if that's going to happen. So if in doubt in how to make the world a better place, have an inner contemplation. Is what's driving your desire to go into action? Is fear driving that action? And just be curious about that. There's no judgment. Increase your sensitivity to sense when fear is driving the action. That feedback, that sensing that fear might be driving the action is information. Is itself a moment of waking up? Because what sees the fear as fear is consciousness itself. Is a moment where, in seeing the fear for what it is, fear, that same seeing moment is a pivot moment. The more fear is seen for what it is, the less it will look like a good way to go, good push-off point. And even if no alternative comes in, meaning no action comes in as an alternative to take to a fear-based action, there's an invitation to pause and do nothing. Except you won't be doing nothing. You'll be in that moment in a shift away from fear-based actions and towards living in alignment with love itself. So go out and change the world. It's a beautiful exploration and expression of love. See you next time.